we're going to talk specifically today about locus of control. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, we'll talk about what it means. We'll talk about how it can affect your life and your health. And then we'll talk about what you can do in your life regarding your own locus of control. So what exactly do I mean when I say locus of control? There are a few different definitions, but they boil down to the same thing. The extent to which you feel that you have control over events that impact your life. So the concept was originally developed by a psychologist named Julian Rotter in the 50s and 60s and came from what is called the social learning theory, which suggests that we learn from observing what goes on around us, which leads us to form beliefs that a specific behavior results in specific, a lot of times predictable outcomes, right? We learn by watching. If you have an external locus of control, you believe mainly that the forces outside of you are responsible for much of what happens to you personally. Things like fate, things like luck, the circumstances you're either born into or move into throughout your life. If you have an internal locus of control, you feel like your personal decisions, your actions, and your efforts guide much of your life. What you do affects the outcomes that you get. Now, while some people believe very strongly one way or the other, most of us aren't fully on one end or the other, right? Most of us fall somewhere in between on that spectrum. And I'm going to mention this a few times too, but our locus of control can be different in different settings and situations. So just keep that in mind as well when you're thinking of your own locus of control. So what does this mean? What does this mean for you? How can your thoughts on what controls the path of your life affect you? Well, research has found pros and cons of both external and internal locus of control. Now, to summarize, where there's technically no correct locus of control, internal seems to have more advantages than external. If you have external locus of control, again, meaning that you don't think you have as much control over what happens to you, the main pro is that it can be easier for you to let go of stressful events and situations. If you don't think your actions affected what happened and that something else caused it, it kind of makes sense, right? If it wasn't your fault, then why should you let it bother you? There's no regrets. There's no thoughts of what if I did that type of thing. It can be a more freeing way to think. But the cons of having more of that external locus of control tend to outweigh the positives. People with this mindset tend to credit luck for their successes, and they tend to not give themselves credit for their own hard work. They also typically don't believe they can change their circumstances. If you don't believe that you have control of what's going to happen to you in your life, what do you think could happen? Well, if you think that no matter how hard you work, that it's not going to change your outcomes, do you think it's going to be worth continuing to work hard? Unfortunately, not in a lot of situations, right? This happens a lot with our health. If you believe that genetics is going to control how healthy you are and whether or not you can improve something like your cholesterol or other areas of your health, it tends to affect how hard people try and actually take steps to improve what they can to be as healthy as possible, right? And just to clarify, we do know that genetics do play a role in our health, but we also know that our behavior can 100% affect things in a positive way. So let's just clarify that. But that's what I'm talking about with that external when it comes specifically to health. If you don't think what you do, what your actions are going to have any outcome on how long you live, for example, it's going to be hard to get that motivation, right? Learned helplessness is another term that people use in this situation. So this is when a person who has experienced repeated challenges just comes to believe they don't have any control, right? Then they give up almost trying to make changes and accept their fate, if you will. This is a sad reality for many people, right? Some people absolutely do come up against a ton of challenges in their life, and it's hard not to fall into that learned helplessness. But For those of you who feel like you may be in this category or close to that category, there are ways that you can work to improve your situation and your mindset. I promise. We're going to talk about those here shortly. But first, I want to touch on internal locus of control and the pros and cons of this mindset. So like I mentioned earlier, internal tends to be the preferred mindset based on research. So let's talk about why this is. People that feel like their actions affect their outcomes tend to be less influenced by other people's opinions. They tend to have stronger self-confidence and self-efficacy, which is just self-confidence in specific situations. This makes sense with the internal locus of control, right? If you believe that you're the one that controls your outcomes for the most part, you most likely tend to think that you can do what's needed if you work hard enough. And then in general, those with that internal locus tend to be healthier and happier overall. Again, this makes sense. If you're someone who believes that your actions can influence your physical, mental, emotional, social health, whatever it may be, you're more likely to take action to improve in those areas if you think that you can, right? Now, again, not everyone is fully 100% on that internal locus of control train. So there's not a lot of people walking around who are saying every single result of my life is because of what I do and I'm amazing, so my life is perfect. If you are one of those people, fantastic. But those that tend to lean this way, at least to that internal, thinking they have some control, are typically more positive. They typically have a healthier outlook on life, and they typically make more decisions that positively influence their overall well-being. Okay? One con that can creep up, or a couple cons actually, that can creep up on those with an internal locus is when something doesn't go their way. Let's say you make a decision and it turns out to be not so good. Like I said, those with external locus of control can more easily move on from this because they didn't really think they had much control over it in the first place. But those that think their actions control more of their outcomes, this can be a big downer sometimes, right? They can internalize this failure and it can add some stress, at least in the short term. Now, long term, like I already mentioned, those with an internal mindset locus of control tend to have less stress and anxiety, but this can still be an issue that pops up when we internalize those failures. Another thing to be mindful of is those with an internal locus may not seek as much support or help. If you think you're in control, it makes sense that you may not think that you need that help, right? Or you say, if I just do this or work harder, it's going to work out. As we know, this isn't always the right mindset. So we need to be able to ask for help when we need it, right? This turtle may have caused himself to flip over and he knows it, but he's going to need to ask for some help, right? And we just need to be able to acknowledge when we need some help if you've got that internal locus of control.